nature will find a way if we can just help it. So we mustn't be despondent. I am and remain optimistic about the future. We are an extraordinary species. And in the same way that we have the ability to do the damage, we can do the good.
Hello and welcome to the Lodgecast, a nature and wildlife podcast brought to you by the Beaver Trust. I'm Sophie Patel.
And I'm Eva Bishop. Each episode we bring you the latest news from the Beaver Trust as we welcome beavers back to our rivers to restore our countryside and create resilient landscapes.
And we also explore the state of nature in the UK and speak to fascinating experts and inspiring individuals along the way.
Today we're chatting to Arlin Rickard OBE, founder of the West Country Rivers Trust and later the whole umbrella Rivers Trust organisation, now their Chief Policy Advisor after 25 years leading the movement. Hello Sophie, hi.
Hi Eva, how are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Are you ready to talk beavers and river buffers today?
Always ready to chew the ear off anyone who wants to hear about beavers and our riparian zones. But before we dive too deep in that river, how are you?
Ooh.
What have you been up to recently?
Well, I have to say I've become a bit of a weather woman, I feel. I'm constantly checking the weather. I'm looking currently on my computer at the BBC Weather tab, which is always open because the weather seems to be kind of a little bit more settled than it was over Christmas. And I'm just looking for a good weather window to put my wetsuit on and get in the sea for a bit because it's been such a long time since I've done that. But I'm hoping that as we edge towards spring, she says tentatively, that will become a lot more achievable.
Ah, yes, the arrival of spring. Here it comes. Is there any better time of year? We're off for a swim on Friday and we were topically checking the water quality at Clevedon, which I think is a little bit more helpfully safe in the winter. So that's jolly good. But yeah, spring is fast approaching, isn't it?
It is. And by the time we release this episode, and this time last year, Eva, you were preparing your garden for vegetables and the kitchen for your chicks. I mean, what are your wholesome green-fingered plans for this year? I'm always intrigued, and I think our listeners are as well. Become a bit of a theme.
The chicks are still alive. Miraculously, They haven't been fox food yet. But every day is a win if they're still alive, frankly.
Good.
But I've got a little prop to show you.
Oh, hello.
So, the same chicks. Here's a little eggie.
Yes.
So, listeners, I'm just showing a nice...
She's holding an egg.
Holding an egg.
Like an egg, yeah.
Look at the colour of that one.
Oh, wow. Duck egg blue?
Duck egg blue, but it is in fact a chicken egg. But check this
chicken
out.
Egg blue? What? Okay, she's just held up an even bigger egg, which proportionally
it's like the size of a
enormous.
Goose egg.
It's almost like a jacket potato.
It's a double yolker.
How did the chicken cope with that?
I don't know, but I'm really excited about it.
But it's a beautiful colour. It's like this almost sea glass sort of bluey green.
It's olivey, isn't it?
Are you gonna have an omelette with that? You just need one.
I think it's got to be a fryer so you can see the two yolks side by side.
Oh,
yeah, bacon and eggs. Looking forward to that.
Well done, chicken. That must have.
So that's jolly exciting. And I'm hoping that the 9 remaining hens that we have will lay an array of rainbow-coloured eggs. That's my plan. So we'll see what happens.
Listeners,
keep you posted.
Yeah. Watch this space. And
then I've just I've just ordered my seeds. So the new one this year is cucamelons, which I haven't grown before. Cucamelons. It's actually a thing.
Sorry.
So I think they're these little grape-like mini cucumber melon crosses that you can just pick off any greenhouse grown.
Yeah. Can you freeze them and they make little kind of melon balls?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'll keep you posted as well.
Please do.
But I've got to get past.
Do you know what I'd like? I'd like a cross section of this giant egg and a cucamelon. Forget beavers. This is all I want.
All right. Nice. Now, moving on in the news, water quality, particularly around the coast of Britain, has really hit the headlines in the last few months. There's been concern over legislation around how sewage is disposed of in our waterways, but the fact remains that 100% of English rivers continue to fail water quality standards, which is completely atrocious in this day and age.
It's not great, is it? Even in 2020 alone, nearly 500,000 cases of sewage were reported in just British rivers. And anecdotally, it was really bizarre because this all started to kick off on Twitter in terms of actually having different kinds of alert levels for when the sewage was really bad in a particular coastline. And I remember finding it completely ridiculous having to check on, map services that organisations like Surfers Against Sewage now provide to show the no-go zones as to whether a beach or area of seawater was going to be safe to swim in that day. And particularly when I was with my nephews, to be concerned about their health and well-being, if they were playing down by the water's edge and have to check a map before we go. I mean, why is this happening?
We had that same thing for the first time last year. We were going to go to the beach and that the mother-in-law sent I wouldn't go there. The sewage report looks dreadful. First time ever. It's really
like beaches closing and it's mad.
Anyway, yes, our waterways are fragmented and broken, not the resilient, protective and protected environments we need them to be. It's a huge topic and one we perhaps need a bit of authority on, no?
I think you're right. So without further ado, let's bring in the amazing Arlin Rickard OBE again to answer all our questions and more, I'm sure.
Arlin founded the West Country Rivers Trust in 1994, was chief executive of the Rivers Trust until 2019, and is now their chief policy advisor, as well as a passionate force for good with experience and knowledge second to none when it comes to restoring our rivers here in the UK.
So, Arlin, welcome to the Lodgecast. It's such a pleasure to see you again and to have you on.
Well, it's great. My pleasure. Absolutely delighted. So, and hi to you guys.
Well, we're very honoured to have such river royalty with us today and really excited to share your expertise because of the importance of rivers and connection with beavers. So, thanks very much.
Now, before we find out more about you and your incredible work and inspiring involvement in improving our rivers, we do just need you to judge this episode's Beaver Fact Off. Now, this is where Eva and I go head to head. We know you're familiar with the Lodgecast, so you know what you're in for. So we're going to share our favourite Beaver fact of the week and get you to decide which fact you think is better or more interesting or just which you prefer.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. So here we go. My fact is taking us down to the River Otter, down in East Devon. Now, in the River Otter Beaver trial, there was a site called Clyst William, and in just 5 years, between 2014 and 2019, that site changed from being classified as red to being classified as amber, just because all the evidence is suggesting because of the presence of beavers, this basically went from a site that was in habitat decline to a site that went in habitat recovery, which I think is pretty exciting. So that's my fact. Beavers can make a site recover, which is pretty cool in just a short space of time. Eva, what have you got to say?
You've just completely dwarfed my really puny fact, I'm afraid.
I don't think so.
Go for it.
I was quite scraping the barrel with this one, but
I think it's really
I'm not even sure it's true. Beavers have a top speed of 34 miles an hour.
I think it's pretty good.
I assume that must be in the water. But I thought that was quite fast.
Quite an image on land, wouldn't it?
I have to try quite fast to go that fast on my bike. Beavers are speedy, as it turns out. There we are. Simple.
Wow. Well, I think they're both very interesting. Now, I have to say, Eva, did you get yours out of a Christmas cracker? Because I've seen beavers, and firstly, I can't imagine it would go 34 miles an hour underwater. And I'd really struggled to see it doing it on land. You imagine it picking up a speeding ticket going through town. So I think the fact is highly suspicious. And therefore, I've discounted it as a fact, and I'm going to go with Sophie. But no favouritism. But if it's true, then I will stand corrected.
It's something I probably ought to look
homework
up a bit
for
more
this week.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, thanks, Arlin.
It did cross my mind to wonder how they managed to record that as well. The fact
Zoom. What was that?
Yeah, what was that? Beaver.
Was it on a motorbike at the time?
Oh, good.
Well,
thanks
lovely.
very much.
Glad that's out of the way. So, Arlin, you're working closely with us at Beaver Trust on our River Buffers campaign and film. And I wondered if you could set the scene for our listeners on and give us a good definition of what a river buffer is, because you in past conversations you've given the best version of this that I've heard, as it's a very complex answer.
Well, it is a complex answer, and I suppose and it's kind of easy to be a bit garbled, but the first thing is, I think that what you're looking at doing in a natural environment, and it's very difficult for us in the UK because we have no real natural environments to compare with, but you can find them still in remote parts of the Americas and that kind of thing. And what you will find is that rivers are really protected or buffered from the land beyond, generally through a series of wetlands, but also through vegetative areas, maybe trees, maybe scrub. But typically you'll find these wetlands associated with rivers. And rivers are just most magic and dynamic things that I've been fascinated with water all my life. My great grandfather was captain of the Cutty Sark, so I think which is wonderful.
Oh my god!
He'd sail the seven seas under the power of sail and put up the fastest times between Australia and here, and sailing with a small team of people. Anyway, the point being is I think water's in the blood, and I ran to water or crawled to water the moment I was able, and I've spent my whole life in puddles and ponds and rivers and in the sea ever since, and it seems to be something that's in the family. Buffers are really important, and rivers are very dynamic. So they have an ebb and a flow to them. They spate when it rains, and they drop back when you have drought periods. And the wetlands help to moderate that. So they trap water and release it like a big sponge. But also when rivers overtop, when they flood in a spate event, they're most erosive when they're bank high at the top of the bank. But as soon as they spill out over the floodplain, the speed just slows right down. It becomes like a big torpid pond. And that drag of the floodplain slows it all down. And all the sediment drops out. And it creates new wetlands and oxbows and all kinds of things. Now, this is the dynamic habitat of the beaver. Beavers understand this and they harness this. But we've drained 90% of the wetlands in England. We have 10% of our wetlands left. That's an Environment Agency figure. And even our rivers down here in the southwest, which run from the moors and their headwaters are rather more protected, again are severely denatured. So a buffer zone is anywhere where you get this buffer between the agricultural activities or land use, which is dominated by man, and it can be urban as well as agriculture, and the river. And they take various forms. But for instance, if you want to remove nitrates, for example, which is a big problem in our rivers, you need a fluctuating water table. So the wetlands need to build and drop back. And that creates the right conditions for bacteria that will denitrify, take the N out of the water and gas it off into the air. For phosphorus trapping, you need slightly different conditions and slightly different materials. And of course, as well as moderating our flows, improving our water quality, reducing floods and reducing droughts, those wetlands, those buffers also provide amazing habitat for a host of species. So all of these things is in those two little words, buffer zone. They're all in there. And it's just vital that we start building those buffer around our waterways.
Arlin, we've had the pleasure of working with you on our upcoming documentary On the Edge, which is looking at exactly this, about rivers and buffer zones and why we need them. And you told me something that I haven't forgotten, and I keep thinking about, that the driest part of a river is on the edge, on its riverbanks. Why is that?
Well, again, this is all part of the amazing, hydrogeomorphology of rivers. But you're absolutely right. So when a river is at its average flow, you'll find there's a gap between the top of the river bank and the height of the river, usually a few feet, but it varies a great deal on the size of the river and the flow and the gradient. All these things are kind of magic numbers. And the wetlands form way back from the river, often hundreds of meters. And typically they form at the foot slope. So if you imagine a sort of a valley situation where you've got slopes coming down and then a floodplain in the bottom, where the river will have meandered across that floodplain, possibly over tens of thousands of years, through ice ages and so on, and may have meandered many, many miles from its present course. But in that course, that meandering, it lays down sediment across the floodplain. So that's why the floodplain looks kind of fairly level. So as the river's sitting in that floodplain, it will meander, and over, say, thousands of years, it will move around. It's quite dynamic. But the wetlands fall at the base of the foot slope, because this is where the water that's come down the hill and percolated down through the sort of plateau above. Typically, you'll see this on Dartmoor and Bodmin Moor. That will percolate through, and where it comes through, where the water pressure increases, is at the base of the foot slope. So typically, you have this natural situation. You'll see it in every river in the southwest and most rivers in the country, apart from chalk streams. What you'll see is the foot slope, natural wetlands occurring along the base of the foot slope, getting drier as you get closer to the river, and the last 10 metres next to the river will be the driest on the plain. And so it's, so the place to walk is next to the river, because that's where you keep your feet dry. As you go back, there should be wetlands. Now, the problem is that with drainage, and this was government-led, grant-funded drainage that particularly came in after the war period, and has only just slowed down. The drainage was put in, arterial drainage, sort of herringbone drainage, to drain all those foot slope wetlands. And instead of them providing a buffer between the agricultural activity beyond, now the pesticides, the phosphorus, the nitrates, the sediment are all picked up by those drains straight from the field and fired straight into the river. So we couldn't have done a worse job if we tried. And all that needs to be reversed. It's really, really damaging. I can't tell you how damaging it is.
And presumably that is a vast proportion of the countryside, because, so little is like Bodmin Moor and Dartmoor.
Yeah, and as I've said, the Environment Agency say 90% of our wetlands have been lost in England, and that's the bulk of them. Most of those wetlands, some have been built over, but a lot of those wetlands are exactly the ones that I've described. And again, you're not asking very often to give up very much land, but it needs to be in the right place, and that's the critical thing. So when, to be fair to beavers, when you reintroduce them, what they will often do is kind of intercept that. They understand that hydrogeomorphology. I mean, the other thing is there's connectivity beneath rivers that you don't see. So there's this wonderful area, which is kind of really exciting. Look it up if you haven't come across it, called the Hyperrheic Zone. And these are the gravels. So the gravels that would be laid down, often in that periglacial period. But again, as those rivers meander across the floodplain, there will be a layer of gravel and then sediment building on top of that. The water, as it's running down the river, you're only seeing part of the water. You're seeing the visible bit that flows above the surface. But beneath the surface and beneath the floodplain, water will be percolating all the way through those gravels. And you'll even find invertebrates living in those gravels hundreds of metres from the river. There's a whole ecosystem in there. It's really magic. But because it also depends on those wetlands, providing that connectivity and that flow of water through the system. So, it's kind of really quite a magic area, and we don't know very much about it. There are also lots of magic things too about rivers and their flow. So roughly, when the river is operating in its natural way, it's quite sinuous, and the speed that it flows and the sinuosity, like the bends in the river, will depend on the gradient and the flow. But also you get pools and glides and riffles. And you should have a pool and glide and riffle roughly every 7 times the width of the river. So if you look at the river, in a natural system, you'll have a pool, glide and riffle roughly every 7 times the width. Don't ask me why, but this is sort of nature's arithmetic, if you like, about how the magic of how it works. But when you're restoring rivers, it helps to understand some of these things.
Amazing. And of course, you've been looking at rivers and restoring rivers through your life's work, your career with the Rivers Trust. So on doing a little bit of research, I was quite surprised to see your name pop up in connection with the High Street Baker Greggs. I'd like to ask a little bit about that, but that link and how and why perhaps you came to set up the Association of Rivers Trusts.
Yes, well, it's an interesting link. So I started working with Ted Hughes, actually, the late poet laureate.
Oh, amazing.
No way.
Well, he was an amazing countryman, a very knowledgeable, keen angler, but very influential, had a great understanding of the countryside. Teddy Goldsmith, who founded The Ecologist, He was one of our original trustees. Other local people to the southwest, like Lord Clinton. We had a number of really wonderful people that were prepared to get involved and back the formation of what was West Country Rivers Trust. And it's important to kind of remember the context. So this was we actually formed the trust in 1994. But before that, my background was in agriculture. And I'd seen, from being involved in farming, seen this decline in our countryside, the loss of the insect life, the pollution of the rivers, the decline of the salmon, all of these things, the decline of farmland birds. And I, being involved in agriculture, I could understand why many of these changes had taken place. We'd moved in my lifetime, because I'm getting on a bit now, but, I went to agricultural college in the 1970s. And everything was about production. There was no space very much for conservation or the environment. So it was pesticides and fertilizers and new varieties of crop. And we moved from growing hay, we get one crop a year of hay and hay meadows, to silage. The silage means you can take 7 cuts a year. That means you can put on 7 times as much nitrogen to get a response from the grass. You're getting 7 crops instead of 1 crop of hay. The silage effluent is incredibly polluting. Then also you can keep more livestock. So then people have slurry-based systems instead of straw-based systems. So then you've got slurry issues to deal with. And we also had this move from spring cereals to winter cereals. So people ploughing in the autumn rather than ploughing in the spring. So all of these were massive changes with agriculture. They were huge down in the southwest. We had new crops like maize coming in as well, which also, created a lot of problems in terms of soil damage. So I saw these things taking place. We saw massive pollution problems across many of our rivers, many fish kills and that kind of thing. So we wanted to try to deal with this, but also we had the privatization of water. So nobody knew what that meant at the time. Previously, it had been dealt with by water authorities, but the privatization of water meant we could look forward to hopefully more investment in restoring and improving our ancient sewer system, and that still needs to be done. We're still fighting this one all these years on. So we needed to deal with that. We needed to deal with agriculture, and we felt there was a woodland trust and a national trust and a wildlife trust, but there wasn't a rivers trust. So that's how we came into being. And I was inspired by the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity, and particularly the Rio Summit, which was the big kind of thing in my young life. And I was inspired by the ecosystem approach. There's 12 principles of the ecosystem approach. Now, we leapt into the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity, and started to talk about biodiversity, but we forgot about the ecosystem approach. And that basically are the tools to get the biodiversity. And it's really about protecting and restoring the ecosystems that make it possible. So when we started off the trust, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to employ the 12 principles with the ecosystem approach and apply it to rivers and catchments. And the concept of rivers have to be dealt with as catchments. So when rain falls, it's the whole area where the rain tracks through, down through the trees, down through the scrub, down through the fields, and runs eventually into the river. That's the catchment. And if you can manage that, you can manage this as a discrete unit. It's an ecological unit. And that's the magic of the whole thing. So you can, if you work in a community in your catchment, you can restore your river. And that's what we started to do. And that was in 1994. That was West Country Rivers Trust, which is, now grown and grown. Other parts of the country said, wow, this looks cool. How do you do that? So we started to help them. And I was, as sort of chief executive of the organisation, started to help them to form those. And I met with Ian Gregg, who was chairman of Greg's at the time. Ian's an amazing guy. And there's a book that he wrote called Bread, funnily enough. But he started life, cycling up and down the hills in the north, delivering bread, through doorways. And they had one little bakery. And then they started to buy a second bakery and a second bakery, and he ended up being the chairman of Greg's. You know all about that. You probably enjoyed their, sausage rolls and the rest of it. But Ian, again, another inspired person, an amazing mentor of mine, and a very generous man. And when he helped set up the Eden Rivers Trust, we came together in forming that up in Cumbria. And he said, well, what we need to do is to sort of set up a national body because he said, it's a bit like franchising bakers, and getting them all to come together. We need to kind of build this up nationally. You want a national movement. So he helped me and others to form the Rivers Trust as the umbrella body of the movement. And after 10 years at West Country, I moved across to lead and to set up the Rivers Trust as the umbrella body. And we cover the UK and Ireland. We have trusts in Southern Ireland, but also we've had, trusts and groups follow us and use our model in different places around the world, which is great. So it's been a wonderful success. And for me, it's just an amazing journey. And I couldn't have foreseen when we started how it would turn out.
The power of pastry and water. Arlin, we can't talk to you without acknowledging the kind of tumultuous time that Freshwater has had in the last few months, with all the different kind of legislative ping pong that has been going back and forth in the government about how we treat our sewage, and the fact that our water quality is just not good enough. What challenges do you see our freshwater facing in 2022?
Well, climate change is a key issue here. You've probably just heard that we've had the 7 hottest years on record. And water is a critical part of this. It's not just here in the UK, but obviously around the world. Again, we need to be reminded that we have such a high population density here in England. We have less water per head than any other country in Europe, with the exception of Cyprus and, you could argue, Belgium. That's because if you take the number of people and divide it by the amount of rain that falls upon us, we are impoverished. And in the southeast and London, where most of our population is, we are in serious kind of water deficit. It is defined, the southeast, as semi-arid.
Gosh.
Yeah, and we really run the risk of running out of water in London. There's a real risk without investment. And of course, successive governments have not invested. Water companies will do what they need to do to meet the contract. But, they're only as good as the contract, and the contract just isn't good enough. And the problem is that we're trying to avoid spending money. The government will be now looking at utility bills and saying, electricity is going up and energy is going up, and we can't have water bills going up. They have to. I'm afraid they have to, because otherwise we're going to get in dire trouble. We need to make that investment. And it needs to be made in water supply. So we're not robbing our rivers, of the remaining water that they have. We need to be building sustainable supplies. We need to be managing leaks. We need to be looking at water saving in our houses, and all that requires investment. And on the other hand, in terms of all the waste we produce, we need, again, a comprehensive system to reduce the amount of pollution. And that means, again, working to reduce things that go down the loo, and that's about education. Pee-poo paper is the message always. Pee-poo paper, nothing more than that to go down your loo. And then we need to look at the sewage treatment works and make sure that they are fit for purpose, which a lot of them aren't. They become overwhelmed at certain times of the year. Down in the southwest, we have big problems with that. We have this huge influx of people coming on holiday in the summer, and our sewage treatment just isn't up to it. And of course, that results in overflows. And this is why, in often, almost Victorian systems, when the sewage treatment couldn't cope, it overflows into a storm overflow. Now, this should only really happen in exceptional rainfall events, when the sewers become overwhelmed with drainage water. And the idea is that some sewage will spill, but because it's diluted, it's not going to do too much damage and the rivers are in flood. This is supposed to happen perhaps once a year in a dire situation. It's happening every day. It's happening all the time because the systems are just up to it. And often that is quite raw sewage discharging into quite low rivers. So this is hugely damaging, and we have to have investment to deal with this. And there's no way around it, I'm afraid. We simply have to make that investment. So I'm very, as you can tell, I'm very concerned about it. It worries me a great deal. And this is also part of building resilience against climate change, because, if we want to reduce floods and droughts, we also need to restore the natural environment. And I come back to our wetlands, our buffers, and our soils. And we have this 4 in 1,000, so 0.4%. If we increase the organic matter in soils by 0.4%, that would remove all the carbon we've produced in the last 50 years. It would take us right back to that. That's all it is. But we're damaging soils, and we have no policies in place really yet to deal with that. So these things are critical. Only 14% of our rivers are at good ecological status. In other words, only 14% are deemed to be good or acceptable. That's a minimum. That's using the ecological. If you look at the chemical, not a single river in England meets the good status because of chemical pollution. So, we're in a bad place, and climate change will make it worse. And this is not just an issue for wildlife, it's an issue for people. People will be flooded out of their homes, people will run out of water, and it is critical, and we need to make those investments now. So I'm relying on the young. And it seems to me extraordinary as someone whose generation has trashed the planet. It's my generation. I've trashed the planet. But it's up to the young now to go forward. And it's extraordinary in this world that our best hope lies with a frail teenager, Greta Thunberg, really.
It is extraordinary. So this is very interesting because it's something that I'm quite passionate about at the moment, the climate action and response. And I think that we are, you just said I'm relying on the young, and I think a lot of people are relying on the young, but they're not in a position of power yet to do things about it. And so they are saying the right things and they are leading, but they don't have the execution ability to act on it in the time frame that it needs action. So what more do you think that we as Rivers Trust, Beavers Trust, or communities can do to nudge the policy and nudge the action? Because you've just painted that picture so well of the dire straits we're in. And it's really, really vital that change happens dramatically this year, not, by 2030. All those are just time wasting statements. How can we do more? What do you think Beaver Trust could do to mobilise more, as well as our films and some campaigns? And I'd love your thoughts on all that.
Well, I mean, the thing is, as you get older, and I'm getting older, you do become more sort of frustrated, because I've been at this for years now. I've met so many ministers and so many different parties, and dealt with so many different policies that was going to deal with some of this. And of course, they're all just kicking the can down the road, because it's basically what happens in the next 5 years. Can we get away with that? And then someone else will have to pick up that level of investment. And we're running out of time. So I agree entirely with you that, like my generation, what we can do is to step aside for young people. We can try to create, policies that will empower them. And, so much of our work, I talk about environmental movement as a whole, your work in the Beaver Trust, our work at the Rivers Trust, and right across, sort of the NGO movement, which is very powerful in the UK. It is about empowering people. It's about informing communities so they can make decisions for themselves, and empowering people, and particularly empowering the young or disadvantaged. But we do have to look at that. It's the politics of it. And to be honest, I've been very fortunate to work a lot in Europe, and that's something else I miss. I'm not making a political point here, but all of our legislation in the UK, all of our environmental legislation, frankly, is European. It's not ours. We've done nothing to protect our environment. It's all been left down to Europe. So now we're not governed by Europe. We've really got to take responsibility for this and not shirk the task. We can't blame it on somebody else now. But I've learned so much from our European colleagues, but they are more political. So they will join a political party like a Green Party to make their point. And they will demand that their local government will deliver things. Now, in the UK, what we tend to do is to get frustrated with the politics and join an NGO, and then try to make our voice heard and deliver through that. Now, that's good, and that means we have an immensely powerful charitable and NGO movement here in the UK. But we're disconnected a bit from that politics, and I'm afraid to say we need to get more involved in politics, and we need to push these policies through. And people will have to make those investments, but the rewards are great, not just for ourselves, because we will have better lives, better green, blue space, healthier lives, more enjoyable. We'll feel we're getting more from it. The quality of life can improve, but we're protecting the future for our children and grandchildren. So this is critical, and we've just all got to work together, and that's why we're teaming up. Rivers Trust and Beavers Trust and others in the sort of wildlife link family we're all teaming up to try to pin the government down, pin the politicians down. But equally, you have to win over the electorate. We voted this government in, and we'll vote other governments in the future, and we need to just get people there that are prepared to drive these policies through.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great answer.
With all our guests for this series, we're focusing on hope, and you've touched on this a little here. As I'm sure you can relate, you can talk about the environment a lot and end up feeling quite gloomy about it all. But there's often, there's a lot of good things to celebrate too. What gives you hope for the future?
Well, as I say, we're very fortunate. The people in the Rivers Trust are they're very kind to me. We've got lots of really young, bright people from all, different backgrounds. And I'm kind of amazed at the new technologies and the new communications and the tools that we have to use now. And they're very kind to me because I don't always understand all of this. And that all gives me hope. As I say, I think there is hope with the young, and I see, my son, and I have a granddaughter, and I'm hopeful. But I do see, and I see this in my son who works in the movement as well, this sort of generational shift of shifting baselines. And the trouble is, I will say, well, when I was a boy, I used to go out and there was salmon in the river, and, there were insects everywhere, and, there were insects all stuck on the car windscreen and all that. And, we would hear, nightingales, and you'd lie in a meadow and it was alive with insects. So much of that is gone. And it's not just the kind of ramblings of old men like me. This is true. And we mustn't let our ambition fall, because, we always tend to just measure things we've seen in our own lifetime. And I can remember my father telling me similar stories and me sort of poo-pooing it and saying, oh, well, surely there weren't that many birds about, or surely there weren't that many insects. But anyway, I'm just saying that we mustn't let that slip. So the things that inspire me is here on our farm, and I see this on other farms, we've created a number of ponds, so we've restored a lot of wetlands, as you might imagine. So I'm kind of, half man, half beaver. I'm always out digging ponds. So it is funny, really. But, it does make a huge difference. We've never spread any fertilizer on the land, but, we graze sheep and we produce a very good lamb crop of wonderful lamb, which is good for if people want to eat it every year. And because we're all grassland, 80% of wildlife depends on grassland as part of its ecosystem, part of its life cycle. So grassland's important, and so grazing animals are important. So it's not just about things like, well, we stop eating dairy or we stop eating meat. It's much more complex. We have to get the right balance of everything. But I do see on our own farm things improving. And if we could, and yet still the farm is productive. And also, because of the work we're doing, we're helping to protect communities downstream. Our river here, the headwaters of a river where we are, the downstream will be cleaner. We'll have more drought resilience, more flood resilience. So we can do this everywhere. But nature will find a way if we can just help it. So we mustn't be despondent. I am and remain optimistic about the future. We are an extraordinary species. And in the same way that we have the ability to do the damage, we can do the good. And as I mentioned, we're off grid here. So I have no power, other than the solar energy that I generate. We pump our own water. We have our own septic tank. Everything is kind of enclosed, self-contained here. And yet we operate really, really well, and I know everyone can't do that, but we can move towards sustainable systems. So, renewable energy and the rest, it's all within our grasp. We just need to make that step.
Well, it gives me great hope that you have hope, given all you know. We must wrap shortly, but I just wanted to see if you had any amusing or light-hearted beaver anecdotes to share with us. Have you come across them on your travels and locally? As
I mentioned, we're here on Bodmin Moor, and I mean, not many miles away from me is Robin Hanbury-Tennyson. He's on the sort of next little upland across the way. And we're in the headwaters here of some amazing rivers, the River Liner, which is where I am, but we also have, the River Inny, which runs back down into the Tamar, and just the other side, you have the River Foy and the Camel. So these are all amazing rivers. Now, on the headwaters of the tributaries of the Tamar, we have beavers present. And I came across them first some years ago. These are ones that have mysteriously appeared. I'm not quite sure where they originated. But they are living wild. And when I first came across the prints of the beaver and then some vegetation which had been chewed, characteristically, and the rest of it, I was just amazed. And of course, then I spent some time, until I actually saw the beaver. And I was very thrilled, to take my wife down. And I confidently went to where I thought this was going to be. And she was full of skepticism, about this. And I said, no, this is, I've seen the tracks here, and I've seen where it's pulling these branches down. There's a slide down the bank and into the river and pulling the branches down, stripping the branches and everything. And I said, we'll creep down here. And we did. I just went down there once. I took her down, and there we were. And we filmed the beaver working on the land, in the water.
Amazing.
So she thinks I'm kind of the beaver whisperer. I'm not going to put her up.
That's going to be the name of this episode. Arlin Rickard, the beaver whisperer.
You'll have a string of people lining up to come and be shown where they are. Thank you so much, Arlin. It's been brilliant to talk to you, as expected. And we look forward to sharing all this knowledge and hopefully motivating facts with our listeners. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
No, it's been a joy, and lovely to talk to you all, and my pleasure. And just keep up all the good work, everybody. And don't be despondent. We've got a bright future.
Wow, it was so good to hear what Arlin had to say. His holy trinity of water, soil and air. I mean, we could have branched off into so many different subjects there. Absolutely amazing.
Oh, I thought you were going to say we could have branched off into so many different trees.
I should have. I missed one there.
Next time. No, what a legend, and just such an incredibly interesting career, and so humble. And if anyone's going to get you into rivers, it'll be Arlin, for sure.
Totally. Gosh, I can't wait to share this one with everyone.
Oh, hello, it's quiz time.
That was very musical.
Emma's coming out of her box. Thank you. Hello.
I'm worried that listeners really believe I live in a box now.
A box full of toast.
No, I think what they're imagining is some kind of beaver trap, and we sort of lift the grate, and you've got a carrot there that you've been munching on while you've been waiting and producing.
In the 6 months between seasons, you just keep me in a little crate and feeding me vegetables. Yeah.
You're well fed. She's well fed. She's looking good. Eva, your turn to be quizmaster, is it not? What have you got for us?
It is indeed. And today I'm keeping it topical. So we're going straight back to rivers, like we did in the first series, with 3 very simple and engaging questions.
All about rivers. The bar high.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, ladies, question 1. Which of these is Europe's longest river? Is it A, the Volga, B, the Danube, C, the Elbe?
Not Elbe.
I don't know where the Elbe is. I haven't heard of that one. I know the Volga's in Russia, but I don't. I'm going to lay my flag on the Danube.
I'm going to say...
What flag are you flying today?
The Beaver producer flag.
Excellent.
Iconic one.
Flying proudly on the Danube.
I'm going to say the Volga, because I've never heard of it before. Just to be different.
The answer is indeed A, the Volga.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Well played. Well played, Sophie.
Oh, thanks so much. I mean, so much thought went into that.
Well done.
Well planted and flag department.
Where is that? Where is the Volga?
Oh, don't ask me geography questions. Question 2, moving very swiftly on. Which river derives its name from the Anglo-Saxon for boundary river? Is it A, the Mersey, B, the Severn, or C, the Tyne?
Well,
how is your
good
Anglo-Saxon?
Question.
How is my Anglo-Saxon? How is my river? All of these are not playing to my strengths, Eva. I haven't got a clue.
Well, I'm going to say the River Severn, because it flip-flops between Wales and England. So I'm going to say, and I feel like there was a lot of Anglo-Saxon activity going along in those locations. So that's
I'm absolutely loving your theory. Oh, Emma, what are you going to go for?
I'll go for the Tyne then, so that we've got different answers.
That's usually my strategy. Well, interestingly, it was in fact the Mersey.
Oh, both of us.
So neither of you get a point there. Bad scene. Perhaps you'll claw something back on 3. I liked your logic. It was excellent.
You had a very intelligent logic. I was really impressed by it. I was quite convinced.
We should almost give you a point for the logic alone. Question 3. Which was the first river in the world to be granted the same legal rights as a human being? Was it A, the fly in Papua New Guinea? Was it B, the wanganui in New Zealand? Or C, none have actually been granted the same legal rights yet?
Can I just ask what our legal rights are as human beings?
No, you can't.
But it's my human rights. Sorry, well, I don't know.
I mean, they're many and varied is the answer to that, isn't it? But
I'm going to say the last one because I feel like it's a preposterous thing.
I'm going to go New Zealand because I feel like they're quite forward-thinking and protect quite a lot of their land, maybe?
I don't mean preposterous as in rivers shouldn't, but as in like as if humans would have the knowledge to do that.
Yeah, that is a bit nonsense.
It's a fair point. It's a fair call. Interestingly, it is in fact B, New Zealand in 2017 granted the wanganui same legal rights as a human being. It's essentially, it means that you can defend things like, attacks on it or pollution. It deserves the right for all the safety and environmental.
I like that.
Protection.
Fascinating.
Really, really cool. I mean, imagine if the Y had the same legal rights as a human being. It would be taking all sorts of people to court right now.
Nobody'd be throwing sewage at it.
Yeah, well done.
Well done, New Zealand. Good quiz.
Yeah, nice one.
Enjoyed that. I feel like I had a little trip around the world.
Oh, marvellous.
Well, that's quite enough for this episode of the Lodgecast.
We're releasing our episodes weekly, don't forget, so you really don't have long to wait at all for the next instalment from Beaver Trust.
No, you don't. So we're going to see you next Tuesday when we'll be chatting to Emily Knight, a renowned broadcast journalist, producer and presenter of some of the BBC's most popular nature radio shows and podcasts.
That should be full of fun. So make sure you've subscribed to the Lodgecast on your podcast platform of choice so that you don't miss it.
And for more from Beaver Trust, don't forget that you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Beaver Trust, and head over to our website beavertrust.org and sign up to our free newsletter.
Also, don't forget that to celebrate this series, we're giving away a few copies of Derek Gow's book, Bringing Back the Beaver, all about his experience of reintroducing beavers in the UK.
You know the drill now, listeners. So to get your hands on a copy, you can post about how much you love the Lodgecast by tagging at Beaver Trust and using hashtag the Lodgecast on Twitter or Instagram, or you can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and email us a screen grab so that we know it was you, and email us info@beavertrust.org.
We will announce the winners at the end of the series.
See you next week.
This podcast, as always, is a mixture of fact and opinion. It was hosted by Sophie Pavel and Eva Bishop. It was produced and edited by Emma Brisdian for Beaver Trust.